Weekly Download, a podcast about interesting game industry news.
Brought to you by Big Games Machine.
How is 2008 17 years ago?
Yeah, crazy. It hurts.
That does. But those are spoilers. People listening thinking, what's 17 years ago? Don't worry. We'll get to that. That was like a cold open where we start with something at the end. But this is what we do. Before we start recording, we like talk about the topics at the end and then we come back full circle. But hello, everybody. Welcome back to talking about Full Circle. We're back again, another week, another weekly download. But today, you might have noticed that we've got another new person for the roster.
We just
Megan,
keep coming.
Hello. We do. I just keep pulling people out the closet left, right, and centre. Everyone's coming. Everyone's joining. Again, would you like to introduce yourself to the weekly downloaders? I don't know. We don't have a fandom yet.
We'll get there. We'll think of one. Yes. Hello. I'm Megan. I've been with Big Games Machine for about a year and a half now, and yeah, very excited to be on the podcast. A big fan of this podcast and the podcast that came before, personally. All the podcasts, big fan of all the podcasts. Yeah, that's me, really. Not much. I used to be a journalist before I started here in both local news and games.
So that means you're really good for sniffing out these stories, which,
very skilled.
I say this every week. I always say, like, oh, we've got really good stories today. But yet again, we do have really good stories, and I know that Megan, you have some really good insights into a few of these. We're going to be taking a look at a rather tense, explosive might be the word. If I was working for I was going to say one of the British newspapers, but the international audience won't care about that. So, but if I was writing headlines, I'd go for maybe explosive interview with Roblox CEO David Baszucki on child safety, and then we've also going to be taking a look at the rather surprising news, I'd say, that the Saudi Arabian Public Investment Fund, who just bought EA and have done a lot of investing into video games in the last couple of years, they're reportedly running low on cash, so we might not see any more acquisitions from them. And then finally, we'll be taking a look what can only really be described as the disastrous debut To The Moon Expo, which took place within the last couple of weeks in Birmingham, England, which, Megan, you are from, aren't you? So there's a bit of
hometown. I am Brummie. This is some local
a bit of hometown investment in this, unfortunately.
I know. Well, what can you do?
Well, not a lot, apparently, because that's the event didn't go very well. But that's for the future. We're going to start by taking a look at this story about Roblox, and it's all about child safety. I know we've spoken about this on the podcast. You know, we've covered it a lot in the weekly download and the daily download in the past.
Seemingly never-ending conversation.
No,
right now.
Never. But someone who might want it to end is David Baszucki, who, I mean, this is a crazy interview, I think, and I think what makes it is what makes it so interesting is that this was an interview between the New York Times and the Roblox CEO, and by all intents and purposes, it seems that David came into this expecting quite a laid-back praise piece of sorts, talking about Roblox and how great the platform is, and how many hours everyone's playing. But it very quickly morphed into, and for good reason, I think we'd both say, this very intense conversation about the ongoing issues that the platform is having with child safety and predatorial behavior. And, I know, Megan, you've got strong opinions on this, but it's fascinating to me that someone in this position can seem so hostile and unwilling to discuss what is probably one of the most important parts of a platform like Roblox, because it's aimed at children.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's one of those very strange situations where in the interview, even though he said he wasn't, he seemed to be getting a bit frustrated with the questions that the New York Times were asking him. He, despite never actually giving any kind of concrete answers to the questions they're asking, I think it's really concerning how agitated he was getting. It seemed like he was kind of treating it more as like an inconvenience, these questions, and the concept of child safety and all of it, then it is like a very essential part of the game. He says himself that they have like millions of 6 to 12-year-olds playing, and that they want to have this kind of safe environment to start them in the world of games, and yet it doesn't seem like they're actually making any steps towards that. And I was saying before the show about how, even though it's not comparable, if you look at Club Penguin in 2007, when it was at its peak of about 30 million-ish players, obviously much smaller number.
Shout out. There might be people listening to this who haven't heard of Club Penguin, which is
Club Penguin, my childhood, my online game of choice, forever in my heart. It was even though it was a completely different time with much less technology, child safety and protection was at the forefront. They talked about it all the time in interviews. It was something they really put a lot of effort into. And at the time, 30 million players in 2007 was unheard of, insane numbers. And the fact that they could do it then and put all this effort in, I don't think, and I'm sure we'll talk about it in a minute, the concept of having huge audiences and huge numbers of people playing, which is what Dave Baszucki seems to kind of use as a scapegoat for this, is an excuse. I essentially think child safety, regardless of how many people are in the game, when it is a game targeted largely at children, should be at the forefront. Yeah, pretty big.
Yeah, and I think, we've seen that Roblox have definitely taken measures. I don't think you were implying that they hadn't. But
no, of course they absolutely have.
I
it's
think
more the lack of willingness to talk about it.
Be open and have the conversation. And he just seemed very frustrated to even be having this conversation. And for people unaware, this has been going on for a long, long time. But one of the really big damning stories and reports that came out at the end of last year, so at the end of 2024, was this report from Hindenburg Research, which essentially alleged that Roblox was just fundamentally failing to protect younger users. And this was something that was brought up during this interview. And rather than engaging with that report in good faith, he just continues to kind of like deflect and question the legitimacy of the firm. And, I think not to repeat what you've said, but the concern is that this is a platform that parents are, right or wrong, letting kids engage with in a way that is very hands-off. And that's something that we're seeing across the industry, and that we need on both the parental or guardian side and the company side. We need more work to make things safe, but it just isn't a good look. Roblox are taking steps. There's these age gating measures, which is something we're seeing, in the UK more prevalently because of the Online Safety Act, where you have to use facial ID to access like 18 plus sites or to verify your age. And that's something that is becoming a bigger factor in Roblox. And I think you'll see a lot more of this AI driven moderation. But, anecdotally, we've heard from people that this software doesn't do a great job of estimating people's ages. And there's a problem within itself. And it does come back to that refusal to go onto a podcast and to partake in an interview and not be willing to discuss these issues when, what else do you think people are interested in? Because I think it doesn't matter how big Roblox is, how great its activations are, if it's not safe, and if you don't appear to be willing to discuss that safety, I think, not to tell parents and guardians what they should or shouldn't do, but it is concerning, and it affects the rest of the space as well. And I know you've got something to say, so I'll stop
100%.
rambling.
Well, two things actually, because I was just thinking about how I think there are some things that he said in the interview on the topic of kind of age verification and things like that are kind of really good ideas. So he was talking in the full interview about how they were going to separate people by ages and have them so they could only speak to people who were like 1 or 2 years like around their age. And I do agree with what Baszucki was saying about how, when questioned about like why is there online chats in this, I think it is a great platform, especially when we've had things like COVID where children were very isolated and not able to interact with other kids. It is a great way to socialize when it's done safely. And I think if they are able to bring in this age verification in a way that works, and doesn't have easy get-arounds to it, that could be a really good way of kind of implementing that. So it's not by any means that I think they're doing everything wrong. I think they've got some good ideas. It's just one of those things where I'll believe it when I see it. As you said, we've seen so many ways around it that I think, it's going to be one of those that it'll have to be.
It's a constant battle, isn't it? It's a constant
100%.
battle. And I think before we go on to our next story, I think the last thing we want to touch on, I know, again, this is something that you've got an opinion on, and a strong one, is one of the other things which came out of it for me was this insistence that as much as Roblox have a duty of care, perhaps is the word, from Bazooki's side of things, the parents are the ultimate arbiters, are the ultimate people with the responsibility to take care of what their kids are consuming on these platforms. I mean, it asks a question of where platform liability ends, for one, but I also think it's a really good point. I do, from his perspective and from companies' perspectives within these conversations, I get the idea that, you know, ultimately parents do have a really big role in this. And I think that's true. And I think that not people making excuses, but I think sometimes, you know, we see a lot of stories where parents and guardians are very unaware of what kids are doing. And it comes as a really big shock to them. And it's like, well, you know, you've got to step up. And I know from my experience of growing up that, and I know it's a very different time, but my engagement with video games was very much controlled by my parents, and they made sure that I wasn't engaging with things that I shouldn't be, and that I wasn't in, you know, what were very primitive online chat rooms and parties back in the old days of the PS3 and the original Xbox. But it feels a bit like a get out of jail thing to say, to be like,
Yeah, 100%.
well, hey, we're going to do stuff, but it's the parents' job, and yeah, it just doesn't sit well with me.
Yeah, and I agree. I think there is a big chunk of it that is up to the parents. I think that parents should know what their child is up to. But I can also kind of see the parent side in that there's this game that all of their kids' friends have been playing. It's on the news. It's this like one of the most well-known games in the world, and you would kind of expect at that point, okay, it's got these safety measures. My kid is going to be safe playing this game that every other child of their age is playing. So I can see why, in a very similar way, I think we saw with the YouTube Kids thing a few years ago, where there was a lot of content on YouTube Kids that wasn't actually suitable for children, but because it was under this kind of umbrella and it was a well-known brand with YouTube, parents were trusting it and letting their kids just watch autoplay videos and getting into these quite dark spaces. I think it's very easy for a parent to assume that their kid is safe when they're not. That said, I think it's very important that parents, while obviously Roblox should have these measures in place, I think it's important that parents kind of talk to their kids about what they're doing online and try and get into that, because a kid who is 6 years old, 12 years old, as Bazooki has said, is on their platform, isn't going to necessarily know when
Danger
they're
signs.
in an inappropriate situation. Yeah, they don't know that because they haven't been told about it maybe, or they just wouldn't expect it. So I think that is the big role for me of a parent in this, is to be talking to their kid and finding out what they're doing online, without necessarily having to stand over their shoulder and watch and read all the chat logs while they're playing Steal a Brain Rot for hours on end on an evening, because I know I wouldn't want to do that, and any of the parents do.
100%.
So
I mean,
yeah, I think that's the difference with
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, on the topic of kids, something that kids tend to do, and we're doing it again, it's a classic weekly download segue. Something kids tend to do is spend all their pocket money, and then they've run out, and they want more, and they can't get what they want with it. And this is a situation that, look at that, boom, segue. Story number 2.
Segue. Solid.
We're looking at the PIF, which is the Saudi Arabian Public Investment Fund, who have for 2 or 3, 4 years now been very, very active in the video game space. You know, they've got partial ownership in companies like Nintendo, just purely through stocks and shares. And then obviously we've seen the really big story in the last couple of weeks, about this leveraged buyout of EA, which has kind of shook the core, I think, because EA is such a big company.
Yeah.
But by all accounts, and again, this is one of those allegedly, reportedly, but there's some fairly concrete evidence that the PIF as a whole is running very low on investable cash at the moment. Now, as far as we know, none of the video game elements are listed among... There's basically a list of projects that are really struggling for money. No video game side of things are involved in that. So it's not a case that, they're going to sell off all the video game stuff or anything like that. But I think undoubtedly there's going to be some financial strain on those companies. And I'd imagine at this point, we're really not going to see this spending spree continue. we like to talk about business sometimes. I know this isn't much of your kind of thing, Megan, which I
Yes,
appreciate, but
I'm
I think
less strong on this one, but
yeah, more takes on Roblox than the PIF,
yeah,
which is entirely
absolutely.
fine. But yeah, I think to me, what's really interesting from this is that in a period of the last couple of years where a lot of funding and acquisitions have shrunk down, and we're seeing a lot less movement of big investments around the industry, the PIF, whether you like them or not, whether you like it or not, sorry, because it's an entity, not a person, they were one of the most active parties within a very struggling industry who were going out there and splashing money around, whether it's acquiring EA or putting a load of money into esports. They were a really big driver of that investment. It kind of looks like that's going to come to an end now, and they're going to have to consolidate. And I think it's going to be interesting to see where their investments go now, because it doesn't seem like they're capable of just spending to acquire and build capital. That kind of feels like it's come to an end. Now, I know you don't have many takes on this, but I want to open the floor in case you do, because I know you've always got an opinion, so I feel like you must have one.
I've got a little bit. I think it's going to be interesting to see kind of where it goes from here. To me, from like a completely uneducated outside perspective, it seems kind of like in their bid to kind of become this big name in gaming and to become a hub for games and esports, they've focused more on maybe getting news out about them, getting talked about in the context of the games industry, than they have necessarily on profiting from it or finding ways to kind of cement themselves as
like producing things.
Yeah, exactly.
Producing
To cement
games,
themselves as game producers. I think it'll be interesting to see if that is going to shift, if they're not going to be able to be getting the news stories specifically about are they acquiring new companies, are they spending money in this industry, and whether that's going to now shift to things like the esports Olympics, for example, or other such like maybe more affordable events, or maybe actually making some games or promoting games or whatever it is that they may decide to go down that route now. I think it will be interesting to see, because I do think, again, an educated perspective, that a lot of what they're looking for is just getting their name, getting the Saudi Arabian government, getting Saudi Arabia as a whole to be synonymous with gaming, and to get the connection out there. So yeah, we'll see. I'm sure we won't hear the end of it. It'll just maybe be something different.
No, yeah, I think that's I think that's quite an educated take. I think don't be so down. That was
We're just making it up off the top of my head. That's what I'm doing.
Well, if that's the case, I think you're on the money, though. I think it's, if we look at EA, one of the really big concerns, let's say, I don't know if that's the right word or not, but one of the big things which really came up when the acquisition of, well, the buyout, sorry, of EA was announced was, well, how much creative independence is the organization that is EA going to have when they've got new owners? Now, this is just speculating, but I wonder now if this is true, if whether they, as an entity, they'll be quite hands off with a lot of the investments, because there's more of a risk. Well, if we go in and we shake things up too much, we don't have other alternatives to fall back on at the moment. Of course, this might change in a year, in 6 months. They really have to make sure that what they have invested in is at least successful, at least able to maintain where they are now. So I think it could be a situation where, again, not to bring up EA, but it's the best example. Will EA gain some leverage because the higher ups at EA are aware of the fact that they need to, they'll be wanting them to succeed, and I think that comes without rocking the boat too much. I know we've seen the Saudi Arabia based DLC from Assassin's Creed Mirage pop up in the last few weeks, and I looked at that and thought, are we going to see more of this kind of soft power style, development where we're kind of nudging things in certain directions? I think this news means we'll see less of that, but I don't know. I'm just an idiot with a microphone, so I can't speak too much on the future. But as I always say, it feels like one that we're going to have to keep an eye on. We saw it with groups like Embracer. When you have these really big groups making really big moves, when they stop doing that, it can have disastrous impacts, or it might really help. We don't know, but you know,
it's definitely going to be an interesting one to watch. And I mean, conversely, it could go the complete opposite way. It could be a really affordable win for them to get games that already exist or already have followings to just have a little bit of Saudi Arabia in there, and then they can get a news article about that, and suddenly look, they're back. So who knows?
I hope that was the pitch for the Assassin's Creed DLC.
A little bit of Saudi Arabia.
I think it's Iraq where the base game's based. It's like, let's just nudge it over a little bit. We'll just get on a plane and move from historic Iraq to Saudi. It's a little move. I mean, speaking about little moves, we can talk about little expos. And Megan, I know
you're killing it on the segues today.
I try. I learned from Jack. He taught me everything I know. But I imagine most UK listeners, viewers will be aware of the To The Moon Expo and just I feel mean, but the disaster that it was. But for anyone who isn't aware, this was a new expo that ran its first event in the UK was it earlier in November? Was it October?
Yeah, I think it was November.
Yeah. So a few weeks ago. Now it already had some, as by the name To The Moon, it did have some Bitcoin crypto-esque beginnings that people have managed to find from Internet Archive, which isn't a great start. But this new expo was very much focused on video games, on indie games, on consumer opportunities, on B2B opportunities as well. It looks like they just really, really, really overestimated the interest, overestimated the ability to put on a good event, and what we've ended up with is something that was a complete disaster. First of all, it took place on weekdays, which anyone who's running a consumer event knows that, especially video games, man, the kids aren't there. It's Wednesday and Thursday, the kids aren't there, so you've already lost a massive part of that audience. And by all accounts, they were hoping for 15 to 20,000 visitors across the 2 days. Everyone who went was like,
maybe a couple hundred
people. But I know you've got more to add on this because of a conversation you've had with a friend of the podcast, Alex, who was in attendance.
Yeah, so specifically one of the kind of highlights that people have mentioned of the event was the indie showcase. And I think that quite interestingly shows that it was a tiny little corner of the venue. It had a few, I don't know exactly how many, but like maybe 15 indie games set up, let's say. And that seems to be, based on what Alex has said, where most people were. And I think we would be having a very different conversation if, instead of trying to cover off B2B, B2C, signings, talks, all of this stuff that you would expect at a very long-running convention like EGX, for example, which has now been absorbed into Comic-Con, if instead of that it was a indie game demo event where you expected maybe 250 people to turn up and you sold a lot less tickets, it was in a much smaller venue, and you focused on just building something small from the start that can then maybe grow in future years, I think we would be having a very different conversation, because it seems like that is what people who were able to attend wanted. And from some developers that were there, they said they had a very successful time being part of this indie showcase. So I think it shows, we've seen this a lot, to kind of go on to a later point that I was going to make, but I'll make it now. We've seen this a lot recently with conventions, not just in gaming, but in recent years, like in book conventions and things like the Willy Wonka experience from last year, the year before, who knows. Time as a circle. People seem to think it's a lot easier to put on these events and a lot cheaper to put on these events than it is. And especially when you've got no name behind you, especially if that name is coming from crypto, for God's sake, it's a lot harder to get people interested, especially if it's on a weekday, especially if tickets cost money, than people I think kind of expect. And that's where we see this influx recently of disaster events. And I think a lot of it is because we're used to seeing these long-running high-budget events like EGX, like PAX, like Comic-Con, that have existed for so long and have the name behind them, but they seem to go so smoothly and so well that
it must be easy.
Be like, it's easy. Of course it is. You just hire a venue, you just get people to come in and set up, and that's it. You're done.
I think the real tragedy for me is the fact that you've mentioned EGX and what EGX has become. We've lost Insomnia as well in the UK. Mm-hmm. There's a real space within the UK. Yeah, there's a real opportunity within the UK space, because I don't want to say space twice really quickly, for really well put together video game convention.
Mm-hmm.
EGX used to be wildly popular, and then over the past, it took the COVID hit, and over the past couple of years, it's shrunk into, by all accounts, this year at Comic-Con being a complete shadow of itself. So there is the opportunity there, but we're in a inside and outside the industry. It's financially people are struggling. There's a lot of figures within the industry, studios, developers, journalists, service providers. People don't have as much money to work with. So when you have an event like this that people commit time, energy, and money towards, and it goes completely wrong, it makes it so much harder for the next person, for the next group who want to try this to do something.
100%.
But I think what you've said about scale is so on the money. We need to take a step back and look, I think Gamescom is the one, especially in terms of like the West. I know we've got like Tokyo Game Show and China Joy, which are huge in the East. But in terms of the West, we have Gamescom really is this massive AAA, everyone who's everyone is there event. But there's still, I know there's a lot of really small events in the UK, very local ones that people go to and are successful, but it's about finding the balance between those two and recognizing, hey, if we start small and it goes well, we can scale up. But if in this case, if we start a bit bigger than we can actually do and it goes really wrong, you've already lost that opportunity, and no one is going to engage with it again, because when it comes, if it comes around to next year, August, September time, and people are like, oh, you're going to go to the moon this year, people will be like,
did you see it last year? Absolutely not. Yeah,
look what happened last year. And it's a shame, because like I said, I think we need more of these events, especially now with the level, the volume of people within the industry that work remotely or work globally, so you're not often interacting with people in person. They're really valuable opportunities, whether it's consumer focused or business focused. And it's, I know we've joked a bit, but it's painful to see this, because we both know how good this kind of stuff can be, and how much
100%.
we need it.
And I know, like, as a Brummie, as we said, I grew up going to Insomnia every year when I was a kid. I have, like, really fond memories of, and there are some games that I associate with these conventions, because it's where I first discovered them. And it'll be like, I'll look back at my Steam wish list and I'll be like, oh, remember when I went to Res this year and I saw this game and it made me really want to play it. And I think there's something to be said that I think could pull people in with being able to play games before anyone else. And I think that is a big part, where if you had a consumer focused indie event where 50 developers came and put their games for quite affordably in a hall, and then they sold 1,000 tickets and people could come and play them. It's a lot smaller scale than this, but I think people would be interested in being able to come and get hands on with these games before.
I do,
people.
yeah. Come and speak to developers. Come and try stuff out. It doesn't need to be. I know that we can be honest. I know that within the wider consumer space, most people do not care about games that aren't these 5. So you're always going to struggle to attract a wider audience. But there's so much passion for those kind of games which you've mentioned, and that we're not sat here trying to lecture an event organizer how to do this, because we don't know. But I think from the outside we can look in, and it's what you said, it comes back to the scale. You scale down and you build up and you see where the interest is. Our friend of the podcast, as we said, Alex, who went, he sent us some pictures. As always, I know I say it every time, every story we discussed, we'll link in the description. I'd recommend going and having a look at this article, because there's pictures there as well. This thing wasn't not busy, it was empty. And it's just such a shame. And
100%. And it's disheartening if you're one of the people that are there to speak, for example, and only 4 people show up to your talk because there's no one there. You're then not going to take the chance on the next small convention.
I couldn't do that. I think if I was doing a talk,
like, sorry
guys,
there's
one person, I'd just be like, why are we here? Come up on stage, come and have a chat.
Let's have a night. Let's go.
So what we're saying is the weekly download will not be at To The Moon next year.
No, well,
or maybe if they pay us loads, we will. But we'll have to pay people to come and listen to us. But I think on the topic of getting paid for for very easy work. We'll wrap up our third big story for the day and get to the quickest part of the podcast, which is never quick. But we call it the Rapid Rundown in the hope that it will be quick one day. But we've got four quite funny, interesting, groovy stories to take a look at today. And the first of these is just to me, Megan, this just sums up where this industry's going. Anyone familiar with Kill Bill? Great film, one of Tarantino's best works, one of his most iconic works, in my opinion, in a fashion which seems similar to Star Wars revealing that Emperor Palpatine had come back in Fortnite rather than the film Rise of Skywalker. There's going to be a narrative sequel to Kill Bill in Fortnite this Sunday, I believe. Sunday the 30th. Yeah.
I'm fascinated by it. I'm fascinated to know if anyone who has never played Fortnite before is going to download it just for this. Yeah. I'm genuinely intrigued.
Maybe. But
I look forward to hearing about it
let that
after
one
the fact.
sit there. It's such a strange story. But yeah, I mean, but this is something not to, again, I always try to be quite quick with these, but this is the kind of stuff we're seeing in Roblox as well, where you're getting more of these experiences where companies are looking and being like, hey, let's try it. We'll see what this one looks like. It's probably something that will come up during the daily newsletter into next week, so make sure you subscribe, link in the description. But yeah, Kill Bill Fortnite, the collaboration we all wanted, ?
We didn't know we needed, but maybe we need
but
it.
maybe we do. And on the topic of things that we might need or we might not know that we need, we've got this is one that you've picked out, Megan.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating.
This is groovy to me, so go on,
tell us. Go on. So there's a new studio called OMW Studio has kind of popped up after a 5-second Mid-Journey AI generated video clip of just like a path going towards like a village in a particularly like aesthetic art style, I guess, went viral online. They've now set up this studio to develop an entire fantasy RPG based on this 5-second clip that went down well. They have said it's going to be AI free, although the developer has admitted to using AI to kind of come up with concept art is what he's described it as, I believe. But I just think it's intriguing that this is something that's happening. I'm desperate to know whether he had any game design experience before this, or if the Mid-Journey clip just made him go like, yeah, that's it, time to make a game.
It's
very early days on this one, so it
does, and everyone's got their own take on the use of AI in games. I think it's something that it's not going to happen at this point. We're already seeing a lot of studios do it, but to me, I find this really interesting, this idea of using an AI tool to essentially pitch an idea to an audience and be like, this might not be what they intended, but the idea of being like, hey, well, look at this clip, what do you think?
What if we made it?
Yeah, what if we made it into a real game, and then the promise of not, I mean, you can promise not to use AI, but to me, it's like, if you're already using that in the process, it just, not embrace it. But yeah, like it'll be interesting to see if this actually gets any momentum, because like what you've said, we don't know if there's any experience of making games here, or whether someone's just been like, oh, we got 10 million views on Twitter, let's make a game. And I'm sure
I'm intrigued. I really am. I think it could either go really well for them, or it could just kind of fall flat. But
we will be sat with
again,
popcorn.
one to keep an eye on.
Yeah, one to keep an eye on. That's the trademark. That's the get that on the merch. One to keep an eye on. Another story to keep an eye on. Why not? Hey, why not use it straight away? Is Steam Machines. Not everyone, but people very excited for this. And I think part of that has come from the idea of people thinking, oh, it might be an affordable PC. Now, Valve hasn't said it won't be affordable, but it's interesting that they've come out essentially and said this will not be priced. It won't be priced alongside the PS5, the PS5 Pro, Xbox Series. Probably a good thing not to price it against the Xbox Series, because that seems to be going up in price every other week. But yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting to see where the price falls on this. I know that, Megan, you've got a really souped up Stardew Valley machine,
I
so
do
not one
indeed.
for
my,
you.
My expensive. I mean, I'd love one actually because I think it could potentially replace my PlayStation 5 for me. Because the only reason I know, hot take. The only reason I got a PlayStation 5 really was so I could play games on my TV, and I think if this could do that for me, which it would be able to, then it could be a contender. I can understand, and I think it's going to end up being maybe closer to £1,000 than not. I can understand why, because with consoles, you've got the ability to subsidize because people have to buy your games. They have to buy games from you. Steam doesn't have that luxury. It's a computer. You'll have access to the internet. You'll have access to Xbox Game Pass, etc. So there is a good chance if they subsidize this that they could lose money rather than make money on it.
Yeah. And they don't need to.
They wouldn't want
really?
To do that.
They don't need to.
People are going to buy it regardless of what it costs. That's the tragic truth for me, maybe my wallet. But yeah, I could completely see why they're going to charge more for it. I am both excited and hesitant to see how much it costs.
It does look so cute, though.
It looks
so cute.
Just imagine it just sitting on my little TV counter. So cute. But
it is very cute. Cute little cube. We've had the GameCube, now we've got the Steam Cube. But yeah, I think it'll be interesting. I think either way, if it's too low, it's too high, whatever it ends up being, we saw with the Switch 2, so much discourse about the price. People still went and bought it. I think some detractors tend to underestimate how easy us gamers are to part with our money if we really, something that is a want becomes a need quite quickly.
Very quickly.
If the opportunity arises. And I think for me, as someone that has kind of gone back and forth with PC gaming, the Steam Deck was a really big thing for me. I look at this and I think if it's the right price, I'd probably be interested. But as you said, Valve are in a position where they can, as Nintendo have done in the past, cut console or hardware prices and justify it through software because they're already making all that money through software anyway. So it feels like this is Valve looking and seeing a gap in the market. But I don't think they'll build a device and make it good value. I think they'll build something and say, "Look, you don't have to buy it, but if you don't want to build a PC, if you want, if you trust us, we've got good warranties, we've got good support, we've got 20, 30 years of evidence to prove how good of a company we are. Here's a console-esque experience." But hey, it's also still a PC, and I appreciate the fact this is not a very rapid rundown, but I do like the fact that they've come out and been like, hey, it is still a PC, so you can do whatever you want with it. Yeah, and I think that's always been something that everyone loves about Valve is how they keep the system open. And if anything, they can probably justify a bit of an additional cost because it is a computer. And if it's a decent enough computer that you can play games on, but hey, if you really want to, you can go and do your homework or you can go on browse the internet and things like that, then it could be really good value in it, and it could be a better option than a laptop, especially, I'd say. In terms of something that doesn't seem to be good value, our last story for this week is Ubisoft back in the news. I feel like normally they're in one of our more primary spots, but this time it's because just a little one today, because despite announcing the game 17 years ago, they've now got a fresh list of new hiring opportunities for Beyond Good and Evil 2, which I'm so confused where this game is. Like, I'm old enough to have seen it get announced like three times, I feel, at this point.
Maybe
three times.
But it's crazy.
Yeah.
I do wonder if this game will ever come out, or if it's just going to, every 5 to 10 years, be re-announced. We'll find out.
I feel like we hear nothing about it, and then it pops up in a random financial report, or someone who used to work at Ubisoft is like, oh yeah, they're still making it.
It still exists. I feel like at this point they just are embarrassed to cancel it, so it's just going to keep going forever, but we'll see. Maybe.
I mean, we'll probably, hey, if by all accounts Half-Life 3 is coming out, then, this surely will release at some point. So, yeah. I'd say one to keep an eye on, but I don't think it's even worth keeping an eye on. Just kind of discard what we've just said, and in 3 years' time, maybe it will come out.
Yeah, maybe we might see another news article about it in a couple of years.
Yeah, we don't know either way. We're not sure whether it will or will not launch, but something we are sure of, and it's the sad time of the day. I was going to say of the news then. The sad time of the day.
The sad time of the news.
Where we look back and we wrap the episode. So all I want to say is thank you again for everyone tuning in, listening, watching, however you're enjoying our analysis. Thank you. Megan, I want to give you a special thanks and a special shout out. You've made your debut now. How do you feel?
Great. Thank you for having me. Had a wonderful time. Great chat.
Oh, it's been a pleasure.
Always
You'll
love
be
to
back
chat
now.
with you.
You'll be back now.
You'll never get rid of me.
No, well, maybe not. But we'll have to keep bringing you back. I think you've been a good addition. But be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, whether you're an Apple podcaster, whether it's Spotify, whether you're watching on YouTube, however you're enjoying our episodes, be sure to subscribe. Now, you might be thinking, hey, I'd rather read my news. I don't like your dulcet tones, or I just prefer to sit down and blast through while I'm having my lunch or my morning coffee. The good news is I can offer you two things. We've got the weekly download via LinkedIn. So you get that every week on a Friday, Monday to Friday, you get all the stories that we've spoken about during the week. Or alternatively, if you're there thinking, I just want more industry news, give me more, give me all the stories every day. Yeah, if you don't want it to ever end, apart from on weekends.
Yeah, we don't
Apart
do that.
from weekends, Monday to Friday, straight to your inbox. We've got the daily download. The link for that will be in the description. It's very quick, very easy. Just pop your email address in and you get that 5 days a week. We sit down, we curate the biggest stories from the day, give you a summary, tell you what it means for the industry, give you all the links you need, and that's straight to your inbox. I quite like to, I sit down and write the download in the morning with my coffee. So you could read it with your coffee if you want, or you can wait till you're having dinner and you sat with a glass of wine. And
if I'm writing it might be closer to dinner time.
Either way, though, it's great. It's full of quality information. And other than that, thanks for downloading all of today's stories. We'll be back again next week with more stories and trends. Happy Thanksgiving to our American viewers. If you're wondering why Jack isn't here today, it's because even as an Englishman, he does celebrate Thanksgiving.
He's very thankful.
Yeah, we're very thankful to you all. Thank you so much for listening, and we will catch you next time. See you later.
Bye.
Whoop, whoop.